No front door. 9,400 years ago, the honeycomb city, Çatalhöyük, where people travelled on the roof and went home using ladders. Çatalhöyük is a Neolithic site located in the Anatolian plateau of Turkey. And wow, the materials you sent are truly amazing. Let's delve into the key aspects of how people lived here. It's a place that poses very fundamental questions about the concepts of cities or societies that we usually think of. The location is the Konya Plain in present-day Turkey, specifically a mound called Höyük. The term Höyük comes from Turkish, meaning artificial mound. The era is the Neolithic period, starting around 7,400 BC, where people lived continuously for about 2,000 years. At its peak, the population is estimated to have been between 3,500 and 8,000, which would be considered a major city by Neolithic standards. The discovery was made in 1958 by a man named James Mellart. Since then, Professor Ian Hodder has been leading the follow-up research since 1993. However, this mound is about 20 meters high. It's not just a pile of ruins. They built new houses layer upon layer on top of the old ones. You could say it's a place where the memory of society is stored vertically. What's amazing is the architectural style. There were absolutely no streets or alleys. The houses were all clustered together like a beehive. It was truly a beehive city. Each individual house had walls, but there were no paths or public spaces like squares between the houses on the ground. So how did people move around? They couldn't fly in the sky, right? People moved across the roofs of the flat houses. The entrance to the house wasn't a door in the wall, but a hole in the roof. They placed a ladder there to go up and down. This hole also served as a ventilation opening. The roof was not just a passageway, but also a place for work and meeting people. In a way, it served as a town square. It was a major thoroughfare, a workspace, and a social gathering place. Think about it. To get to my house, I inevitably have to pass over my neighbour's roof. If I have a bad relationship with my neighbour, I can't get home. The building itself required and enforced a very strong social trust and cooperation system. It's a structure where community cohesion is prioritised over privacy, so to speak. In a way, this is like a social contract formed through architecture. The interior is also very unique. Basically, it was a rectangular house made of mud bricks, supported by wooden beams for the roof. However, the internal structure was quite standardised. There was a central room, a fireplace, a slightly elevated platform and storage space, among other things. And what's even more unusual is that they frequently applied white plaster to the walls and floors. In some places, up to 450 layers have been discovered. Why did they go to such lengths? There may have been issues of cleanliness, but I believe the ceremonial significance of regeneration or purification was stronger. And this white wall also served as a canvas for colourful murals. Scenes of hunting and geometric patterns were depicted on it. The burial customs are also very different from today. I buried the dead person under the sleeping platform on the floor of the house. You slept over your ancestors every night. From a modern perspective, it's really hard to understand. Life and death were not separated, and ancestors and descendants shared the same space. The house was the tomb, and the tomb was the house. In some cases, it has been suggested that only the skull was removed and restored with plaster, and then it was possibly restored or circulated again inside the house. And on the wall there were those famous bull skulls and horn decorations, which are called Bucrania. These were installed. I think it might have been an intention to symbolically bring the powerful force of the wild into the home and tame it as a form of control. The house served not just as a simple living space, but also played a role as a kind of sanctuary, where the sacred and the secular were integrated. But if the structure of the houses had been standardized, would there have been no special classes like rulers or nobles? The size and design of the houses confirmed at this site are surprisingly uniform. No house is particularly larger or more elaborate than the others, and no buildings that could be considered palaces, large temples, or mansions of the elite class were found at all. This serves as important evidence that Çatalhöyük was likely a fairly egalitarian society. Is it possible for a city of 8,000 people to exist like that? So it is sometimes presented as a model of a city without a state. How could such a large community be maintained without a centralized power structure? Recently, the analysis of DNA from ancient bones has drawn attention as an answer. It seems likely that a matrilineal kinship network was important. In other words, kin groups centered around mothers and their children lived together, forming a community through close connections. The clustering of buildings may also reflect this kinship network. In other words, instead of a powerful king or priest, strong family and kinship ties could have been the core that supported society. But why did they create such a unique structure, a city without streets? I think the primary purpose is defense. Of course, there must have been clear defensive advantages as well. It's very difficult to invade from the outside. It's essentially surrounded by walls. However, that alone may not fully explain everything. There were probably multiple factors at play. For example, it is possible that the surrounding area was somewhat wetland, which might have made travelling on the roof more advantageous than creating a path on the ground. If the houses were closely packed together, the insulation effect would have been good as well. And the effect of strengthening social cohesion that I mentioned earlier. Also, since the walls are shared, there would have been resource efficiency in terms of saving building materials and labour. So, it could be seen as a very rational choice to try to solve multiple problems at once with a single design. When compared to other nearby ruins, will the characteristics of Çatalhöyük stand out more? For example, in the case of Jericho, which is almost contemporary, they built very large and monumental defensive walls. However, it can be said that Çatalhöyük used a type of cellular defense system, where each house is connected, forming an overall defense system instead of a large structure. Also, there is the site of Göbekli Tepe, which is slightly earlier than Çatalhöyük. While it was a centre for massive rituals, there are almost no traces of habitation there. However, Çatalhöyük shows a complete integration of ceremonial elements and living spaces. This is important evidence that people have definitively transitioned to a settled society based on agriculture, living together in one place. To summarise, 9,000 years ago, people lived by moving under roofs instead of on paths, intertwining life and death, art and faith all within their homes. This unique characteristic is probably why it was registered as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2012. It is recognised as a unique evidence of early urban development, formed on the basis of an egalitarian social structure, showcasing an exceptional universal value through its community-centred architectural style. Çatalhöyük can be seen as an alternative urban model that shows a completely different path from the one many later cities chose, which involved creating wide streets, dividing buildings by function, and differentiating spaces according to social classes.